Hello, everyone. Can you believe it? I think Scott has like the best audience. To wait for Scott 1 hour and you are still here with us. Incredible, incredible. Anyway, I'm happy that all is good with Scott because I was a little concerned, it's life. You never know, but welcome back to my channel. Mr. Scott Ritter is back and people are happy.
Thank you. And again, I apologize. Life gets confusing at sometimes, but I made it. So here we are.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I just want to say, I hope the internet from my side is working all right, so you can hear us well. Just give us a sign here. Yes. Okay, great. I have 4 questions, but who knows? I might have new questions being born from our conversation. By the way, how much time do we have? Because this I don't know at this moment.
Given the fact that I'm late, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think 4 questions is not a lot. I will start with something that I was not planning to start with. However, I think this is important. So NATO and the articles, 14 articles of NATO. Article number 1 says, and please to everyone who's watching, apologies for my English if I make any mistake mispronouncing. The parties undertake, as set forth in the Charter of the United Nations, to settle any international dispute in which they might be involved. Side note from me, read Ukraine. By peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not, difficult word, engendered, and to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. My question is this. Clearly, this is article number 1, Scott. What happens if those articles are not respected? So they are not respecting their own article number 1.
Well, what happens when you form a club and you make club rules, and then everybody decides after a while these rules are inconvenient, we're just going to disregard them. NATO, of course, is in violation of its own rules. I mean, this is sort of what I call the morality clause of NATO, trying to establish NATO as a legitimate organization within the framework of the United Nations organization. An organization of defense, meaning that the only time NATO would use military force would be if they were attacked, and then Article 51 comes into play. And so they set out and say, we seek to resolve everything peacefully. We're not an aggressor organization. That clearly isn't the case today. NATO is a violent organization. War is its business. It exists only for war. It exists to use the threat of military force and actual military violence in pursuit of its collective policies, and more realistically, as an extension of American foreign and national security, policy. I think what they do is they throw lip service out there. Their idea of peaceful resolution would be for Russia to capitulate. Russian capitulation would bring about a peaceful resolution to this problem, but Russia is not going to capitulate because the problem was created by NATO and NATO members. I mean, we cannot separate the policies of France and Germany from NATO when it comes to the Minsk agreements. And we now know that France and Germany went forward to create the conditions of trapping the Russians in a so-called ceasefire that allowed NATO and Ukraine to stall for time, because at the same time France and Germany are stalling for time to build a Ukrainian army. NATO's building the Ukrainian army. The United States and NATO trainers are building the Ukrainian army. How is that peaceful? And what was the purpose of that Ukrainian army? It's not that I have to speculate. The United States Department of Defense put up a slide that said every 55 days we train a Ukrainian battalion to NATO standards so that they can go here and they draw an arrow to eastern Ukraine to fight Russians. So it's not peaceful. There's nothing peaceful about NATO. Its charter is, especially Article 1, just shows the hypocrisy of NATO today. And thank you for pointing that out. And first of all, your pronunciation of the words are better than I do. So
thank you. It's not easy sometimes, to pronounce those words, but I want to ask you, so in this case, if this article number 1 is clearly not respected,
correct.
What organization or who is looking over it? Who is, let's say, the judge of it to say, all right, NATO, you are not respecting the article number 1? Who is it? Is it United Nations?
No, NATO is not beholden to the United Nations. NATO is a collective security arrangement, a treaty that operates outside of the framework of the United Nations. So the Secretary General of the United Nations has no impact on it. NATO is beholden to no one but its collective membership. That's about it. So they police themselves.
So it's like a gang.
Good job. You nice. I like that. Can I steal that? Because I'm going to use that.
Please, because this is my very simple way of thinking about things, as I'm not an expert in any of this, as we know. Okay, Scott, let's go to question number 2, which is something that came to me this morning. I was thinking, we look at the map of Russia, okay? The border length with the countries that are neighbors of Russia, I will say 5 countries, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4 countries here. So the length of the borderline, Kazakhstan has, it will be in kilometers, by the way, not miles. Kazakhstan has 7,512 kilometers, China 4,209, Mongolia 3.485, and Ukraine almost 2,000, 1,925. My question is, why they have chosen, let's call them those evil forces, Ukraine, to do their operation against Russia? Because we know this is all about resources, because ultimately it's after China. I mean, it's just like, it's like a screenplay. Why they have chosen Ukraine instead of Kazakhstan, Scott? Kazakhstan's borderline is 7,512 kilometers.
When you study the formation of Russia, the history of Russia, Ukraine is an integral part of that history. Ukraine is Russia. Now, I know the Ukrainians out there can say, no, Ukraine's Ukraine. The land we call Ukraine, Kievan Rus, etc., is an integral part of the formation of the Russian nation, the Russian state. They are inseparable, inseparable. You cannot consider a Russian state void of most of what we call Ukraine today. I mean, Western Ukraine is an anomaly, but the rest of Ukraine, Kiev, the Donbass, Crimea, even though that's always been Russian, that is part of the development of the Russian nation, not the Russian Federation, the Russian nation, which is bigger than the Russian Federation. The Russian nation encompasses the people, the religion, the culture, the language, and Ukraine is an integral part of that. Kazakhstan is not. Kazakhstan was acquired through conquest. Kazakhstan was part of the Russian manifest destiny, moving, to the east. It's eastward expansion. So, if someone talks about stripping away Kazakhstan from the Russian orbit, that's not it's not an existential threat to Russia. Clearly Russia wants to have good relations with Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has been a part of the Russian nation. It's part of the Russian Empire, part of the Soviet Union, and today, it's they have close relations. But the Kazakh people are a distinct people, distinct language, distinct religions, distinct culture, separate from the Russian nation, so to speak. Ukraine's not. So when one wants to talk about dealing a fatal blow to the Russian nation, you strip away that which is most important to it. And stripping away Ukraine from Russia would weaken Russia. It weakens Russia on any number of levels. First of all, there's the geopolitical aspect of having this giant chunk of territory suddenly part of NATO, right in the heart, within striking distance of Moscow. But there's also the psychological factor. I mean, the Russian nation just lost a big part. The founding part. When you talk about the history of the formation of the Russian nation, we don't speak about Moscow. We speak about Kiev. Kievan Rus. That is it right there, the heart of it, the heart of of what has become Russian Orthodoxy, the Russian language, the Russian people, spread from there to Moscow, from there to St. Petersburg, from there to all other points. That's the heart of it. So this is why stripping away Ukraine is so important. It's a psychological aspect. It's also, a lot of resources, a lot of industry. Ukraine was developed as an industrial state by the Soviet Union, under the Soviet Union. And the Russian economy was the Soviet economy. When we speak about the Soviet Union, if you had gone into the Soviet Union in the 1970s and said, can you guys envision a period of time where all the Soviet republics are gone and it's just Russia? They say, no, this is the Soviet Union. We travel freely to these republics. Everything went to Moscow, including, the economies were operated out of Moscow. And so, the Ukrainian economy was heavily dependent upon Russia, and Russia was heavily dependent upon the Ukrainian economy. There are these links there that continue to exist. The war has complicated it, but even prior to that, there were these links. There's the cultural links, there's the historical links, there's the economic links. And so I think this goes back to that 2019 study done by Rand Corporation. I mean, it talked about the best way to cause the collapse of Russia is to strip Ukraine away from its orbit.
So that was mainly because of the psychological impact it will have on Russian people.
Well, there's geopolitical aspects and economic aspects, but it's also, it would be devastating to the Russian nation. I have a knock at the door, and I have to get this or else this will never end, so please forgive me.
No problem. Hello, everyone. We're waiting again. Let's wait. By the way, thank you so much for your patience. This is just me now. I can't believe that many of you are waiting over an hour. So this says a lot. So let's wait for Scott, and we will continue in a second. It's a waiting day.
Until I make enough money to get that studio apartment and I can build a studio away from everything, I apologize. This is what happens when you work from home.
Thank you, Scott. No, don't worry. It's like, in a way, humorous. Like, what a day. We just keep on waiting today. And I'm very patient, so I think I attracted patient audience as well.
You sound like
I want to ask
you sound like my wife. I'm always waiting for you, Scott. I'm always waiting. You're late. Anyways.
By the way, I have to say to everyone, we had so many interviews, me and Scott was never, ever late. It was like marine precision, Swiss watch, on time. And then I got my karma back twice because Scott was extending our interviews and someone else was paying the price. So there you have it. This is how it works in the universe. It's, not the energy goes like this, never wasted. Anyway, Scott, going back to our conversation, what to expect from the Wagner Group in Belarus? Simple question.
It looks like, well, first, before we go on, I made the mistake of turning on the comments. And so Elena is holding me to task about Novgorod the Great and Novgorod Rus and all that. And I just want to make sure that I'm not discounting that aspect of it too. But Kievan Rus is also a critical part. But now I should probably turn off those comments because I'll be spending the whole day reading those and not paying attention to your questions. So there, the comments are off, but
yeah, it's distracting, I know. So what to expect from this Wagner Group being positioned there? And then I continue with this region.
Well, understand that the Wagner in Belarus is not the Wagner that existed in Lugansk. In Lugansk, it was a division-sized military formation, heavily equipped with tanks, armored fighting vehicles, artillery, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, etc., provided to them by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Wagner had to turn in all of that equipment. So what you're getting in Belarus is Wagner manpower. Now, Wagner has a twofold mission out of Belarus, and this is interesting. They are, of course, They have signed a training agreement with the Belarus government, and they are providing training to select units, territorial defense units, etc. They're doing that, but they are also continuing their activities in Africa. And indeed, many of the Wagner fighters who have gone to Belarus will be rotating out. There's a Wagner rotation in Africa that, because of the fight in Ukraine, hasn't been able to rotate out, several thousand strong, and they're due to rotate back. They'll be going to Belarus, or some of them will be given the option of signing contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Others will be rotating into Africa, and that's a significant part of the ongoing mission. The Russian government has made it clear that it plans to continue to use Wagner in Africa as a security assistance organization, and we see Wagner, the potential role of Wagner expanding with the recent coup d'état in Niger, a place where American Special Forces had been training the Niger security forces. There's some talk that maybe Wagner will now step in and fill that vacuum, expanding its role in West Africa. So Wagner will be there. Wagner's in Belarus training. The one thing Wagner isn't is this division-sized unit ready to strike in Poland or strike down into Ukraine. It's not organized for that. It's not equipped for that at this juncture. And my understanding is that the Belarus government isn't at this stage planning on converting Wagner into a standalone combat unit. I mean, Lukashenko joked about it with Putin in St. Petersburg, saying that Wagner wants to go to Poland. But how would Wagner go to Poland? They don't have any tanks. They don't have any artillery. They don't have any armored fighting vehicles. And frankly speaking, there's not that many of them. I mean, we don't know what the total numbers are right now. 8,000.
Why would they want? Scott, sorry. Why would they want to go to Poland?
It was a joke. It was simply to threaten.
I mean, yeah,
it's
like what
it's
for? Yeah.
It's one of these silly, testosterone-driven machismo jokes that guys make in combat. You have the Polish government threatening to send troops in, the Polish government sticking out its chest, the Polish government doing this, that, and the other thing, and you have Wagner saying, "Bring it on." It's meaningless talk because it's not backed up by anything real.
Thank you. So that region that is called Suwałki Corridor, what do you think? Because there were some statements made here in Russia about that area. What do you think will be happening there? Do you feel like there will be some kind of action taking place, or this is just very, let's say, sensitive spot on the map?
Well, from a NATO, understand that this the Suwałki corridor, the perceived vulnerability there is purely until recently a NATO construct, meaning NATO invented it. Because Belarus was not, I mean, even though they had close links with the Russian military, Belarus was not a staging ground of the Russian military. So it's not as though the Russian military was staged right there to move north along the Suwałki corridor. Yes, Russian troops were in Kaliningrad, and that links to it. But this is just it's a seam between Poland and Lithuania that is weak because the Poles haven't forward deployed their defenses there. Neither have the Lithuanians. So there's this border area that is a seam, a weakness in NATO's otherwise, iron curtain that theoretically could be exploited by the Russians. They could punch through the Suwalki corridor and cut the Baltics off from Poland. That's the notion. There was no reason for Russia to even consider doing this. Russia doesn't sit there and spend their every waking moment thinking, how can we defeat NATO? How can we do this? Russia's not like NATO. Russia doesn't promote, wars of aggression. However, the Baltic states have made moves since the initiation of the special military operation to isolate Kaliningrad. There's talk about a naval blockade or a blockade of the ports, blocking the trains. That's an act of war. And then the question is now, what does Russia do in response to that? And so now it's come in, people are saying that the Suwalki corridor might be ideal to create a land bridge that would connect Belarus with Kaliningrad to guarantee the connectivity of this. That's a plan. But once a land bridge means you're going to war against NATO. And so now the question is the quickest way to defeat the Baltic states to operate through the Suwalki corridor, which is undefended, meaning you're not going to accomplish your task of defeating the land armies of Lithuania or Poland? Or are there better ways to go in and deliver the knockout blow to the Baltic states? And I would say that the Suwalki corridor would be the last place Russia would go into. That if they're going to take out the Baltic states, there's more direct ways of getting to the respective capital cities and terminating the political existence of these states. So who knows? Again, I'm not a Russian diplomat. I don't sit here and write Russian point papers, and maybe there's someone there that's thinking differently, and God bless them. That's what they're allowed to do. But just from a purely military driven standpoint, it's not what I would be doing if I want to knock out the Baltic states. It's a waste of resources. There are sufficient resources in Kaliningrad. They don't need to be reinforced from the land out of Belarus. It's a diversion of forces. It's unnecessary. It's better to take your forces and take them where they'll have the greatest impact. And that would be closing with and destroying NATO forces in the Baltics, and then eliminating the political decision makers that prompted this to begin with. The people who are talking about a Kaliningrad blockade, people are talking about turning the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake, things of that nature. Those are threats, existential threats to Russia's security, and Russia has every right to prepare to respond accordingly. And I think Russia has plans in place to remove the Baltic nations as a threat to Russia if that ever came to pass.
I had a question, Scott, on my latest live stream with the Duran. And I want to apologize if this lady is watching. What I will do for you, because I didn't ask the Duran your question, I will ask Scott your question. And if I have another conversation maybe with the Duran, I will ask the Duran again the same question, because I feel bad we didn't talk about it. It's a great question for Scott too. Fiona's question was, what will be the effect of Russia's victory on NATO and European Union?
NATO has backed itself into a corner, or a rhetorical corner and a policy corner. They've said that they can't accept a Russian victory. They're going to have to deal with it because Russia's winning. They're also committed now. They've doubled down on stupid, as I like to say, about creating the mechanism of confrontation with Russia. Let's just be clear right now. What should have emerged from the Vilnius summit was the reality that NATO is a paper tiger, that NATO has zero genuine combat capacity, that NATO is incapable, as it's currently organized, to wage large-scale ground combat in Europe. They look good on paper, but let's just examine a couple things. One, Stoltenberg talked about creating a 300,000 strong rapid response force. They already have a 40,000 strong rapid response force. It can't respond rapidly anywhere. It's a joke. It hasn't exercised in its full capacity. It exists on paper only, and it has zero combat power. I mean, it's not there. Plus, what have we done? The American component of that, I think, is the paratroopers. We're not going to sit there and let them fight with a bunch of NATO forces. If we go to war, they're going to be part integrated. So it's a joke organization. Now they're talking about making it a 300,000 strong. Who's going to pay for it? Where are they going to get the troops? But here's the other thing: how are they going to train? How do you train 300,000 men from all over NATO? Where do you bring them together? This is expensive. The Marine Corps didn't get to be and I know I'm glad I turned off the comments because I always get people mad at me when I say this, but we're the world's premier combat force. There's nobody who can beat us. Never happened, never will. And one of the reasons why we're that way is we believe in ourselves. Believe me, in combat, believing in yourself goes a long way. Doubt gets you killed. Aggressiveness, when you're paired up with other aggressive people, you tend to win, especially when you're highly trained, which means you're spending all your time when you're not engaged in war, preparing for war, thinking about it, training for it, getting those muscles working the right way. And we train all the time. And you train for the wars you're going to fight. If all the Marine Corps did is train small unit tactics, and then we were called upon to perform a multi-division sized operation, we wouldn't do so well because we'd be stumbling around going, how do we coordinate regimental operations? How do we link together? What's the command? It would collapse. You have to train for it. How is NATO going to train to use 300,000 troops? They're not. They don't know how to do it. They're not going to do it. It's too expensive. So this is a force that exists on paper only, and nobody can afford it. I'd be surprised if NATO generated half that many forces for this. But that's the problem: is NATO's positioned itself for a confrontation that it can't afford to get into. And whatever they do, it's going to come too late because Russia is going to win the Ukraine conflict sooner rather than later. This is not going to be a forever war. Now, the good news is that there are winds of political change taking place in Europe. Governments are starting to fall. Governments are at risk. Even ones that might not fall, like France. I don't think Macron's out the door yet. But Macron is a guy who is starting to say the right things, like a new European security framework. That's actually the words that Russia put in their draft treaty back in December of 2021, a new European security framework. That's what Russia's looking for. And you're starting to hear people in NATO talk about this, about the need for a new European security framework, one that recognizes Russia's legitimate national security interests. Again, Russian terminology that everybody ignored in 2021. They can't ignore it today. So one of the most likely things that's going to happen is that the Russian victory will cause NATO to regroup and rethink where it's going. Now, this is going to be an interesting discussion because the Poles and the Balts are all about leaning forward. They want those 300,000 troops. They want, aggressive defense spending. They want NATO to commit to the forward defense of Europe, or as they see Europe. But the rest of NATO may not want that. They decide that no, what we need to do is de-escalate. So the most likely consequence of the Russian victory is the initiation of a broad dialogue within the framework of NATO and within the framework of the European Union about what its future is. Where do they want to go? You have economies that are failing right now. I mean, Germany's heading down the drain. The United Kingdom down the drain. Italy is struggling. France is struggling. The last thing they need to do is get involved in a military restructuring of Europe that has them investing hundreds of billions of euros that they don't have. They don't have that money anymore. So I think what we're looking at is the beginning of a dialogue. It'll be a difficult dialogue because there will not be unity. And I also think it's basically planting the seeds of the end of NATO, because NATO is a consensus-driven organization. And when you start to have several cliques inside this gang, as you called it, this sub-gangs, and they're going to say, well, that's not in our interest. We don't want to be part of this anymore. That's not why we're part of NATO, et cetera. I think you're going to start to see fracturing of NATO politically, and that will lead to the eventual demise of NATO. And I think this is the likely outcome. It'll take decades to unfold. It won't happen overnight. But I think what you'll see, the Russian victory will set in motion the condition. Because here's the most important aspect of the Russian victory. It's not necessarily all about what NATO is going to do. It's about what Russia is going to do, or more importantly, what Russia isn't going to do. And Russia isn't going to organize to continue the fight against NATO. Russia will build a robust military that can defend itself. NATO is expanding. Finland, Sweden, even though Sweden's not quite in yet, but Russia will have to build military capacity to deal with this, and this is going to look threatening to some people in NATO. But again, genuine military experts know the difference between a defensive-oriented organization and one that is geared towards offensive action. The Soviet army that was stationed in East Germany, in Poland, and elsewhere was an offensive-oriented army. Even though the forward elements trained to receive a NATO attack before they counterattacked, everything was geared on moving forces to the west offensively. I don't think you're going to see that from the new Russian military. I think you're going to see a new Russian military that's geared towards being able to defend critical parts of Russia from a NATO attack and then launch a counterattack afterwards. So I think Russia will actually position itself to be more about economic and social reconstruction of the new Russian territories, solving the problem of Ukraine. What do you do with the post-conflict Ukraine? Because it's not in Russia's interest. We talked earlier about the importance of Ukraine. It's not in Russia's interest to turn Ukraine into a cancerous cesspool that can continuously exist to infect Russia. It's actually in Russia's interest to get Ukraine back up on its feet and to become reintegrated in a peaceful way with not just Russia, but the European Union. So I think you're going to see that Russia is going to do something that NATO apparently has forgotten how to do. That's called wage diplomacy. That Russia is going to, engage diplomatically across the board. And in doing so, and by doing that, I think Russia is going to help diffuse a lot of the angst that exists in places like Poland, like the Baltics, like Romania, frontline states who are very concerned about what a Russian victory could mean because they feel vulnerable. Many of them should probably start to reassess what value NATO brings, because all NATO has brought is death, destruction, ruination. NATO has brought nothing good, nothing positive to any of them.
Thank you so much for this. I was ready to ask you my next question, but now with what you were saying, I want to ask you this. A few days ago, I was reading an article I found in on one of the Polish portals that was talking about how important women are in Ukraine for Ukraine's GDP, for the economy of Ukraine. I don't remember now exactly the number, how many women left, and Ukraine is desperate at this point for them to come back with children after the conflict. So Scott, how they are going to rebuild this? How they are going to take care of that, whatever remains there, since, as we know, majority of those women will never return to that land again.
Ukraine has shot itself in the foot. I mean, it's created this problem for itself, and sometimes problems can't be solved. Sometimes problems create a new paradigm, a new reality, and you have to adjust to that. I don't think Ukraine is going to be able to return to pre-war Ukraine. First of all, no matter what, they've lost 20% of their country. They're never going to get that back. If this war continues, there's a possibility they could lose even more. And it's not just the Russians doing territorial acquisition, but you have Poland actively conspiring with the Lithuanian government about making a move into Western Ukraine. And and if once you get into the business of dismembering Ukraine, then the Hungarians have a claim, and the Carpathians, the Romanians have a claim, and you're just going to see chunks of Ukraine taken out until what's left is, this little rump state built around Kiev, and it's going to be an agricultural-based society. What modern woman wants to? I mean, I'm not picking on farmers and farmers' wives. God bless them, because weren't for them, we'd all starve to death. And a lot of the modern day farmers are smarter than half the people who live in cities, because modern agronomy is complicated. I'm not denigrating this. I'm just saying that, the vast majority of the Ukrainian women didn't grow up saying, I want to be in the agriculture business. I want to be a farmer's wife, or I want to be a farmer, and my husband supports me. It's a modern world. Anything can happen. Most of them want high-tech jobs. Most of them want well-paying high-tech jobs, which needs a functioning economy, a modern functioning economy, etc. Those jobs aren't going to exist in Ukraine. They're going to exist elsewhere. And so you're going to see the flight of women out of Ukraine. And it will define the future of Ukraine. Ukraine is going to lose significant aspects of its genetic pool. It just means that the future of Ukraine is going to be different than the past. What existed. It's a sad reality.
Thank you. I want to say something that just reminded me when you were saying again. I saw a video, TikTok video. I still remember how it was so unpleasant to watch. So the place where they recruit those people, right, to fight in Ukraine, there was a guy who was mentally disabled. Clearly, he was not able to perform any military task, in my opinion. And his mom was taking care of him. And she brought him to that, probably you saw this too, to this commission, right, to the Scott, and they said the guy is fine to go. I could not believe this. It was so heartbreaking to watch. He was barely making any sense walking those directions. And this poor mom watching her son going there. I don't know. I have no words for this. How much longer this will go on? Because this is so cruel. Of course, there are many forms of cruelty, right? They die on the battlefield. But this is another version of cruelty. Watching this older woman taking care of her son who is not mentally healthy. How much longer this will go on? It's just unbelievable to me.
There's a couple things. I mean, look, it's devastating. There's a scene in the movie Dr. Zhivago, I think, that it's based upon reality, but it's a scene where the Red Army is fighting against a children's military academy, and the old Tsarist officers is taking the young children out and dress them up in their uniforms, and they line up and they march, and then they engage in the Red Army kills them. But as they go through, they see they kill children, and it's a devastating impact on all involved. So just. I mean, imagine I don't want to flip this too much, but imagine the Russian soldiers taking a Ukrainian trench line, and he comes across this, a severely disabled person. And imagine how devastating that would be. But here's the worst part. Let's go back to blaming who's to blame here. The military commissars in Ukraine are the most corrupt people imaginable. First of all, they have all these fat men that you see running around bumping people on the head and stealing them. They've all bought that position. Okay, they're not there because they were assigned. In the United States, military recruiting is a job. I mean, we need recruiters. A lot of people volunteer for it because if you do a good recruiting tour, you get a nice fitness report. You might, if you're enlisted, you get a meritorious promotion. If you're an officer, you survive that one, and now you get to move on. Maybe they'll give you a better job. Nobody wants to be a recruiter because it's just an unpleasant game. But at least we're being, we're relatively being honest. We go out there and we have goals, objectives, we meet, and we actually want the job to end so we can go back. These guys have bought the position so they don't have to go to war. Okay, so these are cowards right off the bat. They're cowards. And then they get bonuses for bringing bodies in. There's a bounty. It's a bounty system. And so they're bounty hunters. They're not recruiters. They're going out and they're grabbing bodies, and they get these bodies and they don't care. The mentally disabled person you speak of, there's been people that have gone in that have gone in with artificial legs. They said, yeah, you're good to go. I'm not good to go. Well, the problem is if I got a piece of paper here that I'm accountable for. If I don't bring you in, if I don't fill this paper, I don't get my bonus. I don't get my money. And that's what's happening. Ukraine is a fundamentally broken nation. If you're down to recruiting children, old men, and people with disabilities, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Now again, I really want to ask my next question, but something came to me again. We know that there is already such a technology, AI technology, that they have robots that can literally fight the people. Why they don't send robots? This is, you understand, like, to me, it's like, why you take human being who is not even capable of performing anything. Meanwhile, you have this technology that you're sending out in Manhattan somewhere, looking like a dog. So they have technology. They can send AI robots to fight. Maybe fights for an hour, for 2 hours. I don't know, Scott. Why they don't do this? Why they use people? They have no use of those people.
Well, ultimately, I mean, a man's going to beat a robot every day in combat. I mean, the first time you fight a robot, the robot will take you by surprise and all that stuff. Once you figure it out, it's a machine. A key thing about humans is their survival instinct. How do you train a robot to be afraid? Fear is sort of an important driver. If I'm afraid that you're going to kill me, my survival instinct kicks in. I can start to get focused. I'm willing to kill, to defend myself. These are all human factors. A robot is programmed by a human, and we're not there yet. We're not into the drone thing. The better question is, if I have 5 healthy guys that can do push-ups, they can run, they can do sit-ups, and they can think, and I can get them to work as a team, I'll defeat 50 disabled people. Just going to happen. So why do you want to take and the training? Imagine the cost of getting these disabled people through the system, getting uniforms, trained, moving them out there. You're eating up a lot of resources. You're eating up, things that could be better used. This is corruption. This isn't about. You're asking the wrong question, because it's not about military capacity at the front line. There's not a single person that can argue that disabled person is going to do anything other than die on the front line. The 62-year-old man with the artificial leg is going to die on the front line. The 35-year-old man with asthma is going to die on the front line. They're not going to kill anybody. They're going to die. That's it. So you're not improving anything. Actually, you're making Ukraine weaker, because they're going to go into a frontline position that somebody's going to look on the map and say, well, we have this position fully manned. You do not have that position fully manned. That position is going to be destroyed. The enemy's going to come pouring through. So why are they doing this? Because it's making Ukraine weaker across the board. There's no aspect of this recruitment that makes Ukraine stronger. Why are they doing it? Corruption, 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 corruption. These military commissars are war criminals. They're cowards of the first order. I hope, I gotta be careful what I say, because I don't want to come off. The problem is when I get into this mood here, suddenly killing people isn't a bad idea. And I'm supposed to be somebody who promotes peace and all that. And ultimately I will promote peace, but I would not shed tears if I saw a village rise up and gun these people down the moment they entered the village. Right now we have the villagers doing the right thing, which is to peacefully confront them and and they compel the guys to turn away. And you're going to see Ukraine doing that more and more as communities come together to keep this lawless element away from them, because they're not doing legitimate recruitment. They're fulfilling quotas. They're bounty hunters. They're making money for themselves. They're not doing it for Ukraine. And it would just do my heart really, really good to see these guys not being able to do that task anymore. These are corrupt people that should be held to account. History will hold them to account. Books will be written about this where they'll be condemned, but that doesn't save the people that they're currently shanghaiing. It's just part of the sadness, the tragedy that is Ukraine today, across the board. And you have these military commissars. If there's ever a reason to deserve the death penalty, these guys deserve it.
So now I think that this war is not only lost on Ukraine's side because of how Russia is doing this military operation, but this war has been lost because of Ukrainian corruption. A long time ago already.
Ukraine was
corruption, right? Yeah.
Most corrupt places on the planet before this war started. And all this war has done is empower corruption. There's not an honest game being played in Ukraine today. Everything's a grift, everything. From the treatment of wounded to the feeding of soldiers, everything's a grift. It's all about making money, put it in my pocket. There's very few people out there who are serving Ukraine, where patriotism is the driving factor. Even if you are a patriot, you can't survive unless you get in on the grift. So everybody's making compromises here, there, and everywhere. It's sad.
So finally, to my question about drone attacks, Scott. This morning, I actually was reading the article from TASS here in Moscow. This morning, there was an attempt of drone attack here in Moscow, and on the 24th of July. So clearly, we know there will be more and more attacks of those drones. How dangerous they are for not just the city of Moscow, but for any other region. And they are using them not just in Russia. We know those drones are used in many other countries as well, right? So how serious is this? Can this be prevented or not?
Look, drones are not the modern day equivalent of the strategic air campaign of Desert Storm or the strategic bombing campaign of World War II. You're not going to level a city with drones, at least not the way it is. The Ukrainians are hitting Moscow with 1 drone, 2 drone, 3 drone, 4 drone, 5 drone. And the majority of these drones are being taken down by Russian air defense, primarily electronic warfare, where they disable it. So as the drone comes in towards its target, what you see on some of these videos is it's flying in, and then it just sort of veers away because the Russians have taken control and they've moved it. But it ends up going somewhere else, hitting an apartment building, going into a field, etc. Its primary goal, it's always a bad day if you're on the receiving end of a drone, whether you're a civilian or a military person. So I'm not minimizing the impact of these drones on those people who are impacted. I'm not doing that at all. But it's not a strategic weapon. It's not. If you use the drone to assassinate a Russian leader, if they came in and they took out, Putin or Medvedev or somebody of that nature, now you got a strategic weapon. That's not what's happening here. They're going in for symbolic attacks. They're going in for propaganda purposes. Very hard to defend against drones. The Russians are putting together point defense, as I spoke of. When I was at the Victory Day rehearsal parade, the Russians have throughout, they had these guys with these anti-drone guns walking patrol. And so basically the anti-drone gun is an electronic warfare vehicle. So if a drone comes in, they can use the anti-drone gun to either take control, fry the electronics, do something. But it's that way. Then they have these anti-drone sniper positions that use a large caliber rifle with precision strike, long range sniper capability. So as a drone comes in, they can come in and fire around and try and shoot the drone down with one round, as opposed to blanketing the sky with anti-aircraft fire, because those shells have to come down somewhere. It's a more precise way of eliminating the drone. But that's point defense. That means that the drone actually went from, let's say Z is the target, A is the launch place. It went from A to X without any impediment. It's only when it came to XYZ that the Russians were able to do something about it. To prevent it going from A to X, you need defense in depth. And that becomes very expensive. Russia's a huge country. I think Russia will build, air defense rings, that concentric rings outside of Moscow designed to defend. But it's expensive. And drones are difficult to detect, difficult to target. They're not fast-moving fixed-wing aircraft. They're not large. Radars aren't designed to detect them. Many of them might be made out of non-reflective materials or materials that are minimized in terms of their detectability by radar. It's a tough target. The best way to take out the drone threat is to defeat Ukraine. The best way to make the drone attacks end in Moscow is to defeat Ukraine. The longer this war goes on, the more desperate the Ukrainians will become, and the more important political victories will be. Meaning, if they can make something go boom in Moscow, that's important politically for the Ukrainians, and so they will continue to try to make things go boom in Moscow. The Russians will continue to try and be able to interdict and prevent this, but it's a very difficult problem to, there's no 100% solution yet, except to defeat Ukraine, to take Ukraine off the board, so to speak, as a potential source of these drone attacks.
Thank you, Scott. I have two more questions that are kind of, in a way, connected, I think. We had the Russian-African summit now in St. Petersburg those last 2 days, yesterday and today. So I want to ask you, what do you think will come out of this summit, as far as, do you see any big change or some kind of development coming from this? And one more thing, I really would like to know your thoughts. I know this is not connected with the military stuff. However, what do you make out of Putin signing the law about the digital ruble? How do you look at that? Because, as you know, the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, and dollar and euro, is it, in your opinion, in the same group of digital control that the government has over the citizens, or this, in your opinion, will be different?
Let's talk about the Africa first. Look, Putin, just listen to Putin, and the answer comes clear. Africa is a continent, 1.5 billion people, and growing. It's the largest growing economy, economic bloc in the world. It has tremendous resources. It's going to be a player, and so ask yourself, where do you want to be vis-a-vis Africa? Do you want to be the post-colonial colonial power, United States, France, going into Africa and continuing colonial policies of domination, exploitation, intimidation, etc., or do you want to be the power that speaks of the liberation of Africa, self-determination of Africa, learning to reach its true potential based upon its needs, not outside needs? There was a time when you couldn't, you could only answer that question one way, because there was no alternative. China and Russia, the Soviet Union had been involved in Africa, but not in enough capacity to challenge the West. But today, the West is definitely on the decline. I mean, look at France. France is being evicted from Africa as we speak. All these coups d'etats are removing pro-French governments, pro-French systems. The United States is finding itself boxed out of Africa. And who's stepping in? Russia's stepping in. from a geopolitical empowerment perspective, providing security assistance that had previously been the exclusive domain of the United States, France, and other Western nations. Now Russia has the Wagner Group that's out there doing it better in many ways than the others. Russia doesn't have strings attached. When Russia enters into agreement, they don't come in and try and tell a country how to behave, what you have to do. China is heavily involved in Africa. The development of the African economy, the supply chains, et cetera, are going to China. So I think what we're seeing is that Russia is on the side of helping Africa reach its true potential. And if you befriend the Africans and get them to willingly align with you, so much the better. It's always better to have somebody doing what they want to do as opposed to forcing them to do it. The United States is in the business of forcing people to do things. We intimidate you. We threaten to sanction you. Russia's not threatening to sanction anybody. Russia's doing the opposite. They're just waving off debt. They're promising free food. I think that Russia is positioning itself to be part of the coming African century as Africa matures into a mature regional power. And I mean, Putin said something interesting. He said, "When are we going to have an African member of the Security Council? When are we going to have when's Africa going to get that? And because the Security Council look at it, France, Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, do they even rate Security Council? I mean, maybe they were victors in the Second World War, but when you look at the global economy and global impact, why are these two of the 5 most powerful nations in the world? Where's India? Why isn't India on the Security Council? India could replace, Great Britain, the United Kingdom in a heartbeat in terms of its impact. Why isn't India there? Why isn't Brazil being considered? What about Africa? What about South Africa? As it develops, or they could be. What about the African Union? Why not have an African Union representative or something of that nature? But my point is, the Security Council right now is a dated structure composed of people that no longer. 2 of the 5 members don't have global clout anymore. Purely limited regional powers. That's France and the United Kingdom, and yet they're on the Security Council. Why isn't India? Why isn't there African representation? Why isn't there South American representation? These are fair questions, and I think Russia's positioned itself to be in a place where it can help provide answers because they're making good with Africa. I mean, if you see the way these people meet with Vladimir Putin, he's not isolated. I mean, I know there were fewer attendees to this summit because of the pressure being put on Africa, but think about what I just said. There's fewer attendees because of the pressure put on them by the United States. If you don't think that engenders resentment, then you don't know human nature. The Africans are deeply resentful of the fact that they aren't allowed to behave as sovereign entities, that they have to look over their shoulder and worry about how the United States is going to respond to something. If the United States did a better job of respecting Africa and the wishes of African people and the economic and political desires of the African people instead of dictating to them how they should behave, I think we could compete on the African continent. But right now, I think that we've basically boxed ourselves out, and it's a continent that's going to be defined largely by Russia and by China going forward, and India. I have to, we can't discount the Indians. They're a growing global cloud. Now we come to the second part of your question, which quickly remind me.
Digital ruble.
Digital ruble. Here, my concern about digital currency is that I don't have it. Right now, I open up my wallet and I have some money in my wallet. I have cash. Now, I know it's a joke because I don't have all my cash there. Most of my money's in a bank account, but at least it's money. I can go to the bank account, I can pull the money out. Yes, there's digital aspects of my life. I pay by debit card, by credit card. I can pay online. That's all digital, but it's still all linked to an account with physical money in it. The concept of going purely digital is that I'm not in control. I can suddenly find myself cut off from my money with no recourse, nothing. I mean, it's and and as an American in America, I'm afraid of that. I mean, we're supposed to be this great democracy, but I'm very fearful of my government um, taking vengeance on people because they have all the power. They can cut you off economically. They can terminate your economic existence, and you can't fall back on cash. Cash is no longer king. Um, Russia. I will say this: the Anya, you're there. The convenience of the Russian economy right now. I mean, just the way you do business in Russia. It's the most convenient. Because cash is an inconvenience. I carried cash on me because I didn't have a mirror card. Um, but I try to pay with cash, and the Russians are like, "We really don't want you to be paying in cash. I guess we'll do it for you because you're a foreigner, but we prefer the people with the cards. We just want you to touch the screen and make things happen, make magic happen." Um, I have to read the new laws careful, but I know that from an economic efficiency standpoint, there could be an argument for digital currency. That there's a legitimate argument for digital currency from a efficiency standpoint. But I'm always afraid of governments government power and the power that government will have over the individual if we go to a pure digital um, you system. But
You know why I asked you this, Scott? Because I wanted to hear if you think that, people, there are many people who say they say that Putin is still playing the same game as the World Economic Forum, okay? And that digital ruble will be the same like digital euro or digital dollar, which means ultimately it will come to the point when they have complete control over your behavior, your life. And as I came across this article, it said that you can still use cash and the other cards, which I think will be the same case in other countries as well. I just wonder if that decision was made by him to kind of play the game as if he's playing the game, but he's not, and this will be because of BRICS and is backed by gold, or like it's different, looks like the same, but it's different, or it's really the same thing as what the West will be doing. Because as long as you have an option, right, you can use cash. You have choices. As long as you have choices. That's what
I there's everybody running around. Putin is really a byproduct of the World Economic Forum and the Schwab, that German evil German dude or Swiss dude, whatever he is. He controls the world. I don't agree. So I think Putin is a Russian leader who's looking out what's best for Russia. We also understand that Putin, his job isn't to be all knowing. Nobody can do that. He isn't God. He's dependent upon his expert advisors. And there's a female head of the central bank in Russia who's a big advocate of the digitization of the ruble. And so I think he's being advised by her. I think I would hope that he asks kind of probing questions he tends to ask. I'd like to believe that he is looking out for the welfare of the Russian people. That's his job, his stated job. And I don't think that his goal is the total control of Russian society and the Russian people. I think his goal is efficiency of operations. So I think that's what motivates him. But it's a question for the Russian people. I mean, ultimately, they have to decide. I have to tell you that most Russians I met weren't as concerned about it as I was, because again, most Americans won't understand this, but in America, we live in a far more oppressive society than Russians do. Maybe that's because the Russians might not have the same level of expectations when it comes to individual freedoms in America has. Different historical roots, different cultural expectations. In America, the power of the individual is everything, and in Russia, while the individual is important. So is the state. So is, issues. So maybe it doesn't resonate as much here in America. We find it inherently insulting when someone wants to take control away from us. We want to be in control of everything. Russia, the Russians that I met, I mean, most of them were in control of their lives. I'm not saying they weren't. I mean, they did what they wanted to do. They were happy doing what they wanted to do. They're well adjusted. And I just think that they enjoyed I think the economy functions, and I think they enjoy the efficiency of their economy. And I don't see any of them seeing there a problem with them paying with a mirror card as opposed to reaching their wallet and, counting out. I got my 5 ruble coin here. This is about as useless as it gets in Russia, because it's not like I can go to in America, if I got enough quarters, I can go to a machine and jam quarters in there and at least get a Diet Coke. In Russia, this just either goes in my pocket, goes in the drawer. If it ain't on a card, it's, I'm joking, because of course you can use cash. But
when it's backed by gold, you will see it's worth something. So you never know.
Yeah. Look, first of all, Anya, it's unfair because I'm not an economist. So you're asking me, these economic questions, and I'm just a dilettante. I just run around and I'm amazed.
I just wanted to hear your opinion.
So,
but I agree, and again, judging Moscow, I cannot speak like I don't know that many people here, but of course, the form of electronic payments is the way that majority of people uses. But again, how big is Russia? 12 time zones, right? Correct. So how you can implement such a modern technology in those small villages and places where people are not really that savvy, it takes time. It's a process.
I'll answer it this way, Anya. Driving across the Kalmyk steppes in the middle of nowhere, we stopped off at a little diner type facility, and digital pay. it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Okay, so you've experienced this. I haven't. I have one question here from the viewer, Scott. As Russia modernized its military, why couldn't Ukraine do it? Surely there are some smart people in that country. They share the same technological military history in the Soviet Union. Could you address that, please?
But I mean, Ukraine did modernize its military. The Ukrainian military, when the war started, back in 2014, was primarily it's a smaller military, using Soviet era equipment and such. But what was their need? You had Ukrainian forces. Remember, Ukraine sent troops to Iraq. Ukraine was already training with NATO to get up to NATO standards to modernize its force. So it was moving in that direction. But there was no need for a large standing army. They're very expensive, large standing armies. Ukraine had the military that it needed to have. Plus, remember, Ukraine's a corrupt nation. And what was happening in the 1990s with Ukraine? Their defense industry, the defense industrial base, was being carved up and sold. I mean, when I went to Ukraine in 1997, it was because I was going there to try and stop a Ukrainian black marketeer from, taking production equipment that had been used during Soviet times to produce Soviet missiles and prevent him from selling that on the black market to Iraq, because that's what was happening. The Ukraine was in the business of carving up its assets and selling them to the highest bidder. Corruption governs everything. So it's not like someone's going to sit there and say, and the other thing is about making the quick buck. You'd have to say, we're going to rebuild the Ukrainian military. In order to do that, we're going to redo our defense industry, and we're going to put all that money into making Ukraine better. But that's going to take a couple 10 years to do. When you're in a corrupt state, it's not about how I can make money in 10 years. It's about, how do I make money now? What can I do right now? What scam can I do? What grift can I do? What theft can I orchestrate? And so what was, Ukraine's defense industry, geared around certain export items. For instance, they modified they had tank factories, so they built a modification of the T-64 tank. They were able to export that to I think Georgia bought some. They all got destroyed. But that's that. But it was more about, it's not about making a healthy defense industry. It was about how can we grift. Now in the course of 30 years, some industries did develop, some industries were turned into viable defense industries. But again, Ukraine wasn't in the business of building a large standing army. Since then, since 2014, 2015, with NATO and Western assistance, Ukraine has been rebuilding its military. It has been restructuring its military. And so we've seen that. The problem is it's being driven by outside powers. It's not necessarily a Ukrainian-driven initiative. It's being imposed on them. So that's one aspect of it. No one's imposing. There's not. Canada isn't going to Russia saying, "We need you now to de-emphasize airborne divisions, and we want to put an emphasis on armor brigades." No one's telling. Russia's doing what Russia wants to do, what Russia thinks it needs to do. Russian defense industry is driving its modernization. It's Russian resources, whereas Ukraine is almost totally dependent now upon foreign sources of equipment. So it's a different kind of modernization. And then again, Ukraine is trying to do this in a time of war where it is being hampered, destroyed on a scale far greater than anything's happening to Russia. So it's an unfair comparison to say, why isn't Ukraine doing X? Because Russia's doing the same thing. Russia's a much bigger country. They're not being, their defense industries aren't being bombed on a daily basis. Their economy is actually thriving. The International Monetary Fund upped its projections for Russian growth. Remember, this is Russia that, because of sanctions, was supposed to contract 25%. We now have Russia growing 1.5%. They're trending in this direction. They're reindustrializing. A lot of these defense enterprises that were on the verge of going bankrupt and shutting down are now working triple shifts, pumping out material. And because the Russian military has expanded from 900,000 to 1.5 million, even when this conflict ends, they're going to be building equipment for some time now because they have to build, a 600,000 strong force. We talk about how Stoltenberg's going to build 300,000 strong, rapid deployment force out of all of NATO. Russia is in the business now of building an additional 600,000 full-time standing army. That's going to require a lot of industrial backup, and Russia's doing well. So I think it's unfair to compare the two. The Ukrainians are doing the best they can with what they've got. But remember, corruption. It impedes everything, and even national security. The people that are involved in Ukraine's defense are grifters. They're all making money. Even Zaluzhny, he's making money. All the generals, they're making money, because that's the only way you can survive in Ukraine is to be in on the corruption. There's nobody honest in Ukraine today.
Thank you, Scott, for such a great answer. And the inflation in Russia, right, is around 2%, between 2 and 3%. So looking at other countries, the saying,
They're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what lately, I think about a month ago or so, the Prime Minister of Russia, I don't know, it's strange, like I don't remember the name of the Prime Minister. Not many people do, actually. But he reported on the inflation number, and it was 2 point something, so not even close to 3%. Apparently, China was zero. If it's possible, then congratulations, China, but zero. I don't actually, maybe it's not even good. I don't know if inflation at 0% is good or not, but I think we will end our live here, everyone. I want to say huge thank you to Scott for showing up today. Against all odds. Against all odds, yes.
Just so people understand the context, my daughter's getting married, and so my life is not my own right now. So things happen. So
wonderful news, because another family will be created.
And we hope so.
Yeah. Yes. And that's how we do it, right? So I want to say thank you to Scott again. All the links to Scott, to his YouTube channel, Scott Ritter Extra, his website. Actually, everything is on the website when you go on Scott's website to support Scott's work as well, Scott's books. And I think I forgot if Twitter, Telegram for sure. I'm not even mentioning Twitter anymore because
I'm
it's
back
in and
on
out.
Twitter, yeah, for the moment. So
Okay, okay, okay. And then
I guess it's X now.
what is it?
I think Elon Musk is rebranding Twitter. It's going to be called X.
Just, too much. Like this, confusing. But all the links to support me as well. And I will emphasize one more time to everyone who's watching and appreciate my guests, my content I provide. Please join me on Locals, because you never know. And I'm not saying you never know. So just to make sure. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, we see you next time. Thank you so much to the moderators. I think Deborah was here. And to those people who supported with super chats. I appreciate it. And we see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.